Mr George Freeman.
Thank you, Miss Elliott, and it's a great pleasure to be able to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And in my 5th week in office, I'm grateful, hugely grateful, to the Honourable Member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk and other colleagues for raising these important issues today, not least in the week in which the Comprehensive Spending Review will be settled, and I will then have a chance to look at the overall allocation of funding within the ecosystem for which I'm now responsible as Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. And I wanted to start, Ms Elliott, by reassuring colleagues in the House, those in the gallery and those outside, that this is an issue that I take very seriously personally, and I will explain in a moment my background in this sector, but I would echo the comments of a number of colleagues opposite that if we're going to provide a legacy for Sir David Amess, then taking this issue seriously would seem to me to be one that we ought to be able to come together on. And I welcome the tone of everybody's contributions, including, and perhaps if I may say in particular, from Her Majesty's opposition, highlighting the lack of partisan politics in this and the need to seek and search for cross-party consensus. And I welcomed her reference to the 2015, this government's extra ban on cosmetics, including the 1997 Labour government's then ban. This is something that this country has taken seriously and continues to take seriously, and that is something that we should be proud of. And I particularly wanted to flag, I've received about 36 questions, which I will try and come to, but I wanted to flag in particular the Honourable Member for Linlithgow's very important opening points about the moral and legal issues that sit at the heart of this. It's not just a utilitarian argument. It is actually, you're right, he's right, a moral and legal issue about the values that we hold as a country, and the importance of recognising that sentience confers an extra and additional responsibility, which is something that's enshrined in the Act, but it merits saying. Our obligations to mammals are very much higher than, I would suggest, our obligations to insects. Now, that might be controversial in some places in this country, but I think in this chamber, people understand the difference. I thought it was an important and well-made point. And the number of signatories to these petitions indicates the strength of public views on this matter, and I sincerely thank all honourable members for the quality of their contributions. And I suspect the reason that there aren't more colleagues on my side of the House is that the House is actually debating right now the Animal Welfare Kept Animals Bill, second reading, and while colleagues have been speaking, I've been watching colleagues on this side of the House speaking in the main chamber. So I think it's fair to say that there is very strong cross-party support for getting the framework for animal research right. And I wanted in particular to thank and pay tribute to those who've spoken today, the Honourable Member for Putney for raising the issue of values, and also the important role of companies like Body Shop and campaigns like PETA, and I would echo that. Transparency for consumers in purchasing goods is quite an important factor in driving the culture change that we need to see, and I support her in raising that point. She, like other members, have raised the importance of technology and the organ and human on a chip technologies that, in the end, hold out the opportunity that we may be able to completely liberate ourselves from reliance on animals in due course. The Honourable Member for Stockport raised an important issue about force feeding and factory farming, and I think all of us, again, in this House would like to move away from a situation where there's any reliance on factory farming, but while there is, it is important that it is carried out at the very highest standards and that public trust is supported by sufficient accountability. The member for Rutherglen and Hamilton raised an interesting point about why no applications are turned down that I'll come to. The member for Slough raising the importance of complex cell models and highlighting the need for us to review the workings of the Act. The Honourable Member for Easington highlighting, I thought quite powerfully, the big difference between the amount of money spent, circa £3 billion, on broader life science and medical related research versus it's 100 million, 10 million a year on this, but I think he raises an important point about making sure that this is getting enough attention, and I particularly... Yes, I'll happily give way.
Graham Morris.
He's been very thorough in responding to the points, but just in your opening remarks, and you again alluded to it there, we're not arguing for the outcome of the Comprehensive Spending Review and a huge additional resource. It's about skewing the money, the huge sums that are available towards this particular area, which is more efficacious and more beneficial for everyone concerned.
I know, I understand. He makes a good point and well made. I was about to say, actually, that the National Institute of Health Research, for which in my previous but one ministerial role as Minister for Life Science I was responsible, it's about £1 billion a year research into the practice of health and health research itself. And I would happily raise this with the Minister now responsible at DH, because it seems to me that's quite an important part of the NIHR's remit, to build confidence in health research. And the member for North Ayrshire raised, I think, the important issue of accountability of rate of progress and also the opportunities arising from the UK's departure from the EU. All issues I will try to come to in due course, and if for any reason I miss any, I will happily write to members of the committee with the answer that I would have given if I had time. Ms. Elliott, I wanted to highlight at first that how passionate I am personally about this agenda, for a whole raft of reasons, not just because I have a much beloved cat and dog as a pet, and I, like everyone here and I think most people in this house, feel very strongly that we have a duty of care as human beings to the animals around us, but also because, having had a career in medical research before coming to Parliament in 2010, I've seen for myself both the importance of using every piece of technology to try and remove dependence on animals in the development of medicines, and the importance of carrying public trust in the research process with us. And the truth is that, as honourable members have set out here today, in the life science sector there is a quiet revolution going on, in which the traditional model of drug discovery, which typically takes 15 years, $2 billion, and has an 80% failure rate in the discovery of new drugs, is being quietly transformed by revolutions in genomics and informatics, allowing us to move from a paradigm in which typically the industry would try and develop one drug that fits everybody, one drug that suits all, through a long and complex cycle of theoretical drug discovery targeting in silico chemistry, and then through into in vitro models, and then into animal, and then into human trials, and then into marketing and NICE approval. The revolution in genomics and informatics allows us to begin to target patient groups and to develop drugs around particular blood types, around particular genotypes, phenotypes, and cut out a lot of that long and traditional drug discovery process. And it's a revolution I'm passionate about, not just because it will, in due course, certainly reduce and possibly even eradicate the need for us to rely on often unreliable animal models. You will have heard me, members will have heard me, Ms. Elliott, in other places talk about the need to move away from necessary but actually not perfect models of human disease. Happily give you.
Tandasai.
I thank the Minister for being very generous with his time. I take on board his points about the quiet revolution that is taking place within genomics and medical science more generally. But while that quiet revolution is taking place, millions of animals are being terrorized and killed, and it is not benefiting us or them. So when are we going to set some deadlines and some targets for the elimination of animal testing?
I understand the point he's making, and I will come to it. I don't think it's quite fair. I couldn't quite agree that our reliance at the moment on animal testing is to no use at all. It is to important use in terms of defining certain elements of toxicity and safety. It's not perfect, but I think to say that it has no use is not fair. I'll come to his point about how quickly I think we need to make progress. But I wanted to highlight as well that part of my passion for this is that I've actually tried to found a company developing toxicology AI, predictive software that would predict the toxicology of compounds so that we don't have to rely on animal models. I mean, I care sufficiently about it that I took the trouble to do that. One of the things I discovered in that process, and I just share this with colleagues because it speaks, I think, to the delicacy sometimes around transparency, because passions in this sector are so high, understandably, but they run very high. Colleagues I know will be shocked to discover that in the course of putting together a company to develop toxicology software, you need to be able to understand the experiments that are currently being done in order to be able to model them better using software, which meant that on the board of this company we had somebody from Huntingdon Life Sciences so that we could understand the processes that we were having to replace. The presence of that person on the board was alone sufficient to attract huge and violent attacks from the SHAC, Stop Huntington and Animal Cruelty group. And of course, who did they pick on the board? Was it any of the 8 men, of whom I was one? No, they picked on the company secretary, the least responsible member of the board for the company. She lived alone in a cottage in the Fens and woke one in the middle of the night to find 20 people in balaclavas daubing her house with red paint, calling her a bunny killer. And I just flagged that story because it speaks to the passions and the need for a very balanced approach in the way that colleagues today have raised this issue. And if we're going to be transparent and accountable, we need to make sure that that transparency and accountability can be shared and that we're not putting particular people at risk. But I absolutely share the point that we need to be doing everything we can to make sure that this quiet revolution accelerates and that we reduce reliance on animals for research as fast as we possibly can and to as great an extent as we can. Let me just try, Ms. Elliott, and just set the scene in terms of, for those listening today and those reading this debate later, the framework that we have in place. It's based on the acknowledgement that the use of animals in scientific research, why is it justified at all? Well, it's justified because it is at the moment vital for identifying benefits to humans, animals and the environment, and that we have to try and balance that dependence with our commitment to the highest standards of animal welfare. So that's the basis on which the current law is drafted, and the balance between those two is reflected in the fact that we have a dedicated act for making sure that animal welfare and animal research are properly integrated. And that legal framework, that act, and the responsibility for managing it lies, of course, with the Home Office and the Home Secretary, not actually ministerially with myself, but I will be raising the issues raised today with the Home Office. This Act specifies that animals can only be used in science for specific limited purposes where there are no alternatives, crucial point, and provides protection for these animals through the requirement for application of the 3 Rs, replacement, reduction and refinement. So today's contribution raises 3 related, although separate issues which contribute to the government's overall strategic direction and policy. First, the benefits that are derived from the use of animals in science, where there are as yet no alternatives. Second, the regulatory regime which facilitates such use. And third, our support and commitment and funding of the 3 Rs in order to accelerate progress away from reliance. Let me just take each in turn briefly. At the moment, animal testing and research does play a vital role in understanding how biological systems work in health and disease. It's crucial to our understanding of new medicines and cutting-edge medical technologies for both humans and animal health, and it supports the safety and sustainability of our environment by helping to reduce dependency on chemicals. And animal research has helped us to make life-changing discoveries, from new vaccines and medicines to transplant procedures, anaesthetics and blood transfusions, not least the development of the COVID-19 vaccine, which was made possible because of animal research. So while I completely accept that we need to try and move away as quickly as possible, I think, to be fair, one has to remind people that we're only using animals at the moment because that is the way that we have evolved towards minimising the exposure of human beings to dangerous drugs. And I can assure you, if we were to completely remove all animal use in medicines research now, we'd be exposing humans, our own kith and kin, to much higher risks. And I think that would very quickly be seen as irresponsible. So we need to find a way of substituting those pre-human tests as quickly as possible. And although much research can be done in non-animal models, there are still purposes for which it is sadly essential to use live animals, as the complexity of whole biological mammalian systems can't always be replicated using validated non-animal methodologies. This is especially the case where human medicines are being developed. Yeah, of course.
Graham Morris.
It's been very short. I don't want to make progress, but can I give you an example of a drug that went through extensive animal testing in terms of the established processes, and it was the oh my goodness, it's going out of my mind, the pregnancy sickness drug, thalidomide, precisely, and the animal testing. Yes, so it isn't infallible. But what we have discovered subsequently is that some of these drugs that have been through established animal testing can be repurposed. And we've now discovered that that's an extremely effective drug against leprosy and other conditions. So, there's rightfully a scepticism about statements that animal testing is going to ensure that all the drugs are completely safe, because that's not the case.
Minister Freeman.
Yeah, the honourable member makes an important point, and I'm not suggesting that the current system is 100% perfect at all. And in fact, I have my earlier comments very clear that often animal models are not perfect predictors. He's absolutely right to say that. But it is equally the case to say that without the animal models, there'd be an awful lot of drugs would be taken forward into humans with hugely damaging side effects and no benefit. So I'm not... The point isn't that once you've been through animal testing, you have something that is a perfect drug. The point is that by going through the animal testing, you prevent exposing humans to chemicals that are, to potential drugs that are simply unsafe. Now, it's not perfect, but that is the situation. He's right to point out that animal testing itself isn't a guarantor of efficacy. Let me just try and make progress. I'm conscious of time and the questions. But the truth is, sadly, that without testing of medicines using animals at the moment, we wouldn't know if medicines were safe or effective for use in humans or animals, and that would limit the availability of medicines to treat disease and also the availability of chemicals which could be used for a wide range of purposes in many industries. There is, of course, a human health and safety part of this, that in order to protect workers in the chemical and agricultural industries, we need to make sure that we understand any toxicity of those chemicals before they're used. And without testing of chemicals on animals where there's no alternative methodologies available, we wouldn't know what hazards they present. And many products which are not safe in humans or the environment are detected through animal testing, thus avoiding further downstream harm. And likewise, many... Yes, I'll give away, but I do have to make some progress.
Ruth Jones.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Minister for giving way. I suppose none of us would disagree with the fact that we want to keep humans safe, but I think a lot of people have concerns about the repetition of unnecessary tests and the constant ongoing for pharmaceutical, for chemicals, cosmetics and things like that. And it would be great if you could address that issue in particular.
Minister Freeman.
Yes, she makes a really interesting point, which I will absolutely come to. At the moment, animal testing is required by all global medicines regulators. I just want to be clear, this isn't a UK phenomenon, but it does include the UK's MHRA, who are widely held to be setting the global benchmark, not least in vaccines discovery. And animal testing of chemicals is also sometimes required under UK law relating to the quantity manufactured to protect the safety of workers exposed to materials in large quantities and the environment when chemicals may find their way into the waterways, soil or atmosphere. And all testing of chemicals on animals under the REACH regulations is subject to the last resort principle, which means the manufacturer must always consider legal duty, alternative approaches first, and in some cases secure the agreement of the regulator before proceeding. In order to obtain these benefits that accrue, it is necessary to exempt such animals from the Animal Welfare Act and put in place specific protections for them in a dedicated act. So a number of colleagues raised the question of why this is not covered by the Animal Welfare Act. It's actually the other way around. We've specifically put the use of animals in research into their own legal framework under a dedicated act, known as the Animal Scientific Procedures Act, or ASPA, which, as I say, is the responsibility of the Home Office. The underpinning principle of the ASPA is to protect animals which are sentient in terms of their capacity to experience pain, suffering and distress, and therefore protection of animals on the basis of their sentience is the very principle established in the legal framework. ASPA protects animals in a number of ways. It requires a three-tier system of licensing for individuals conducting procedures on animals, the programme of work which will use animals, and the place where animals are used. And licence holders are required to undergo training and competency assessment and have legal responsibilities to have systems in place to protect animals in compliance with ASPA. Licences are only granted if the scientific purpose is permissible under the law and the research is conducted in line with the 3 Rs. And that means that work can only be conducted in animals if there are no alternatives, only the minimum number of animals are to be used to meet the scientific objectives, and the level of harm caused must be limited to the minimum needed to achieve the approved scientific outcome. And thus, it is illegal in the UK to use an animal in science if the scientific objective can be practicably met using a validated non-animal alternative. ASPA requires that all animals need to be housed and cared for in accordance with the code of practice published for this purpose. And the regulator enforcing the Act operates a system to assure compliance of licence holders with the Act and the conditions of their licence, including inspection, audit, review of reports, and managing cases of potential non-compliance. Under ASPA, any testing required by another UK regulator is permissible. The requirement for such testing is set by the relevant expert regulator, such as the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, or the Health and Safety Executive. With regard to testing of cosmetics, animal testing has been banned in the UK since 1998, and it is illegal to test cosmetic products or their ingredients on animals to meet the requirements of the Cosmetic Regulations Act 2009. However, ingredients which may be used subsequently in cosmetics may require animal testing under other legislation, including REACH, e.g. to assess safety to workers at manufacturing plants. And that testing can be lawful in the UK and is not in conflict with the bans under the cosmetics regulations. Under UK regulations to protect the environment and the safety of workers from the risk of chemicals, animal testing can be permitted under REACH where required by UK regulators, but again, such testing can only be conducted where there are no non-animal alternatives. That brings me to the crucial importance of the development of those alternatives, which as Minister for Science, Technology and Innovation, I'm also committed to because I think it's a huge sector for this country to lead in. And in the report that I wrote for the PM earlier this year on opportunities post-Brexit, I argued that the UK actually should be using our freedoms from the EU regulatory bloc to reach for the top and to regulate in these emerging areas of technology set to build consumer and investor confidence. And this is one of the areas where we could set the gold standard. We could set the benchmark for international groups to follow. And that's why this government does actively support and fund the development and dissemination of the 3Rs, Replacement, Reduction and Refinement Programme. This is achieved primarily through funding for the National Centre for the 3Rs, NC3Rs, which works nationally and internationally to drive the uptake of technologies and ensure that advances are reflected in policy, practice and regulations on animal research. And it's fair to say the NC3Rs is actually viewed as world-leading. Since its launch in 2004, we've committed £100 million through its research, innovation and early career awards to provide new 3R approaches for scientists in academia and industry. And I'm delighted to say that in the last year, the relevant Research Council has increased funding by another 8%. This includes almost £28 million in contracts through its Crackit Challenges Innovation Scheme to UK and EU-based institutions, mainly focusing on new approaches for the safety assessment of pharmaceuticals and chemicals. And I checked earlier today, it isn't fair actually to say that nothing has come of this work. There's a whole raft of very important incremental improvements, including the development of in silico models of cardiotoxicity with Professor Rodriguez, in vivo models of liver tox and kidney tox, and the development of virtual dog modelling as part of the programme, the £2.5 million programme for the digital dog, to substantially reduce dependence on dogs in research. The NC3Rs and the MHRA work to bring together stakeholders in academia, industry, government and animal welfare organisations to facilitate the exchange of information and ideas and the translation of research for the benefit of both animals and science. This has led to changes in international regulations. And the NC3R has just recently launched a new £2.6 million call for the development of that virtual dog to draw together technologies across the country. And building on the work of the NC3Rs, UKRI is also funding a portfolio of research involving humans, animal models and non-animal technologies. And as honourable members opposite have highlighted, those breakthroughs in stem cell research, cell culture systems, lab on a chip, organ on a chip, new computer modelling and imaging technologies, the place of AI, all provide a very powerful nexus for technological approaches that will reduce, and I genuinely believe in due course eliminate, the need for us to rely on animal models. But we have to move at a pace that we can guarantee human safety in the development of new drugs. In 2015, the Non-Animal Technologies Roadmap for the UK was published by Innovate UK and the NC3R in partnership with the Research Councils, the UK's Defence Science and Technology Laboratories. And the NC3R and Innovate UK are currently reviewing the impacts of those investments that were made, a review that I will be taking a keen and close interest in. Let me try, if I may, in the time available, just to respond to some of the specific questions that were raised. The Honourable Member for Easington raised a question of the statistics over the number of experiments. I need to just highlight that the number of experiments and the number of animals is not the same thing. And one of the criteria, one of the metrics we're driving is to reduce the number of animals used. So I just flagged the difference between those two. Animal sentience is already enshrined. It's a very important principle, and that is precisely the reason that we've got that separate legal framework. On alternatives, various members raised the issue of why aren't we doing more to promote alternatives. I want to highlight that the existing law prevents the testing of animals if there are alternatives, and I'm very keen to make that very clear and to make sure that the whole industry understands that obligation. The member for Easington raised the issue of the failure of medicines in humans, and I've tried to address that nobody is suggesting that the use of animals is a guarantor of efficacy and safety in humans, but it is the other way around. It is an important barrier to unnecessary exposure of humans to unsafe medicines. I agree with him. We need to move as quickly as possible to find alternative ways of doing that. A number of colleagues mentioned the statistic of 90% of animal experiments failing. I mean, that's the same point, really, that if failing is they don't predict efficacy and safety perfectly in humans, then yes, but the point is really the other way around. They are there to make sure that those things which we know won't work in humans are prevented from going near humans. They aren't the definitive and final test. The member for Putney raised the issue of work being done to improve the predictive quality of animal tests, which I think is a really important point. We need to continue to manage that. International bodies such as the OECD and the ICH are working on it, but following this debate, I will be asking for reports on what progress has been made, and I'll be happy to share that with colleagues here today. Colleagues asked about the funding for human-based research and has that been increased. The 100 million figure is over 10 years. The BBSRC has increased that figure this year by 8%, and I can assure members that following the CSR, I will be looking to make sure that that number isn't reduced and, if possible, is increased. This is important, not just primarily for animal welfare and for trust in research, but also because moving away from unnecessary and avoidable animal experiments as quickly as possible to more accurate models is actually good for UK life science research and drug discovery. The member for Putney raised the issue of animal testing being the balance of animal and non-animal testing, and I just want to reiterate the point that it is actually only allowed to use animals where there are no non-animal alternatives. Colleagues raised the issue of animal testing establishments breaking the law. I should just say there is a very robust system of licensing and inspection of such establishments, and any non-compliance is appropriately dealt with by a range of remedies, which start with advice and letters of reprimand and retraining, but ultimately lead to fines and prosecutions. And I want to reassure members that, from my point of view, any evidence of malpractice needs to be treated with the very highest degree of urgency. Public trust in this is absolutely key. The Honourable Member for North Ayrshire raised the issue of botulinum, just to reassure the public. That was only in the case of botulinum as a registered medicine being tested before it goes into humans. The issue of force feeding was raised, and when I checked the reason for that, it is force feeding is a controversial term, but it's about making sure that the correct dose is administered. But again, I think the point is well made. We need to make sure that that is being done in the most humane and sentient-friendly way. On the issue of tightening of regulations, the member for North Ayrshire raised, those regulations are always being reviewed. This year, the Home Office commenced a regulatory reform programme to ensure leading regulatory practice is followed. And again, following this debate, I will be asking for an update on what improvements have been made. And the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire raised the issue of tightening of regulations for cosmetics post-EU exit. And the situation is that the ability to test in animals for cosmetic marketing, if no animal alternatives exist, we are now in the same position as the EU. And the controversial case of surmise is currently with the European Court of Justice. Let me conclude, Ms Elliott, by saying I think there have been some really excellent points raised today. I won't repeat them all. I think I've set them out. I will be raising them with the Home Secretary and the Home Office. And whilst I don't believe we're yet at the point where we can move away from animal reliance completely, let me just make very clear that I do think we need to move faster. I think we need to reiterate to the public that that is our intent, and we have a duty of care and a commitment to better drug discovery. I believe deeply that genomics and phenotypics and data are key to that, and I hope all members opposite will join me in making the case for better use of data in the NHS to support drug discovery, because this is a key argument that is often not made. And I'm very happy to accept the challenge of providing a personal guarantee to the member opposite that I will make every effort as Minister for Science, Technology and Innovation to avoid all unnecessary suffering.
Martin Day to wind up.
Thank you very much. May I